So, hey, I wanted to make a video today about some of the narratives going around with kind of race and the police. But to start off, I just want to say the recent case of George Floyd was a tragedy. Honestly, it's inexcusable. Those police officers need to be held criminally liable for what happened. There's no excuse, but that's not really the subject of this post, of this video. Instead, I wanted to kind of look at a broader narrative and some of the broader narratives that come about when these things happen, specifically some of these narratives about cops being racist. So what I want to do here is I actually want to take a look here at, there's an old blog that I wrote a while back that kind of goes into some of this. So first of all, there's sort of a popular narrative out there that police unfairly are going after blacks basically just because of racism. For instance, blacks are busted for drug charges at a higher rate than whites, even though drug use between the two groups is basically about the exact same. Blacks make up a larger portion of the prison population, even though they only make up 12.6% of the US population. Blacks are unfairly stereotyped and stopped by police because they're black. There's a disproportionate number of white cops that are policing black neighborhoods. And that there are more cops in black neighborhoods. So a lot of people kind of are like, well, that's unfair. That's, systemic racism. However, there's a whole other side of this that is often conveniently left out. Okay. And these are shocking statistics. But the first thing I want to do is these statistics don't mean that black people are inherently worse than white people, but these are the facts. And we'll talk about why they exist. First of all, black males, blacks generally, are 6 times more likely to commit homicide. Okay. And if you really narrow that down, about half of the homicides in the United States are committed by black people. And basically, I'd say at least 45% of them are by young black men. Okay. Black people make up about 12% of the population. Let's just cut that in half and say 6% are black males. And then let's cut that in half again and say young black males, 15 to, let's say, 45 in age or 50 in age, somewhere in there. So let's say 3-4% of the population are responsible for nearly half of the murders. Okay. That's insane. That is crazy high. All right. Now, black youth, 9 times more likely to commit homicide. Black youth are 10 times more likely to commit robbery. They're 2.5 times more likely to commit an aggravated assault. These are all based on FBI and Bureau of Justice Statistics information. Okay. Black women are 10 times more likely to be raped than white women, and 99% of those offenders are black men. Okay. According to the FBI, 4,906 black people were murdered by other blacks in 2010 and 2011. That is 1,460 more black Americans were killed by other blacks in those 2 years than were lynched from 1882 to 1968. Okay? That's insane. In 2 years, more black people were killed in the city or murdered by other blacks in America than the entire time of lynching that existed in the United States since since 1882 to 1968. Okay. That's insane. All right. Another thing, Chicago's death toll from November 2001, or from 2001 to basically 2015, was about 7,400 people. The combined total deaths of Operation Iraqi Freedom and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was 8,321. We nearly lost as many people in the city of Chicago alone in the United States as we lost in both the Iraq and war in Afghanistan in the same time period. It's insane. Okay? There is a massive problem with violent crime in the black community, but no one talks about it, because to talk about it is to blame the victim, to blame black people. Black people are a victim group, right? They've been oppressed by white people. Okay. regardless of what you think about that, these stats are stunning, and they have a massive effect on the way police end up interacting with a group that has a massive problem with violence. Now, we're going to talk about why there's a problem with violence, but before we do, let's come down here and take a look, okay, at a few things to keep in mind. In response to higher violent crime rates, poor Black neighborhoods have a greater police presence, okay? You send your police officers to where there's more crime. That explains why, for instance, you're more likely to get caught doing or dealing drugs if you're in a Black neighborhood because there's a lot more cops there. A white person may do drugs just as much, but there are less cops in their neighborhood. Why? Because there's less violent crime in those neighborhoods. Okay? Another thing, 90 to 95% of Blacks are murdered by other Black criminals that the cops are there trying to stop. Okay? The cops are there to stop the violence, to protect Black people. Okay? That's what they're there for. You know, people get really mad about the cops in their neighborhoods, but they don't realize the cops are there to stop the criminals. Okay? The FBI and CDC estimate that between 98 to 123 Blacks are killed each year by the police, while about 5,000 Blacks are killed by Black criminals that the cops are there combating. Okay, so even if 20% of police killings of Black men were unjustified, which is insanely high, an innocent Black man would still be 250 times more likely to be killed by a Black criminal that the cop is trying to stop than by a rogue cop. We are out there saying that we have this problem where Black lives are being threatened by cops when literally you are 250 times more likely to be killed by a Black criminal that the cops are there trying to stop. Now, that doesn't justify when a cop kills someone without justification. Okay, it doesn't. They need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But are we really pretending that that the real threat to Black lives is rogue police officers out killing people? All right, I will say cops pose a risk to anyone's life. They're armed men who are out there interacting with the public. But when you send cops into areas that have very high rates of violent crime, you're going to get higher rates of violent interaction. Here's another stat that I don't have on here, but did you know that Blacks suspects are 3 times more likely to kill a police officer? You don't think that doesn't affect, if police officers are more likely to be assaulted or killed by Black suspects, wouldn't we expect to find different rates of violent interactions between police and Black suspects? These are things that people don't account for when they just simply see a disparity and they immediately assume discrimination. Another thing that's false is to say, oh, well, Black people have violent crime rates because they're just inherently more violent. I don't buy that. Okay. And I think there's a great bit of data that explains that. Okay. So real quick, for any racial group, these data set are true. Okay. White, Black, brown, Chinese, whatever. 90% of runaways and homeless children are from single parent homes. A teen in a single-parent home is 5 times more likely to commit suicide. 71% of teen pregnancies come from single-parent homes. 85% of children with behavioral disorders are from single-parent homes. 71% of high school dropouts come from single-parent homes. 85% of youth in prison come from single-parent homes. Single-parent children or children of single parents are twice as likely to drop out of high school, twice as likely to end up in jail, and 4 times more likely to need help for emotional or behavioral problems. Okay? Now, what percentage of Black homes are single-parent homes? A stunning, staggering 70%. Okay, I'm sorry. I want to just hammer home what that means. You cannot have a stable male population when you have, just imagine it. You have all these young men growing up without a father in the home. And who do they have around them as mentors? In a lot of these inner city neighborhoods, gangs. That's why they join gangs. That's why this gang culture gets this hyper masculine kind of culture amongst non-related young males is so prevalent in inner city Black neighborhoods. These are hotbeds of crime and violence because young men without stable male role models are more violent, regardless of their race. The Black family has been decimated. And it's been decimated not because of Jim Crow, but since Jim Crow. In the 1950s, the Black family and crime, the Black family only had I think it was a 20% single parent rate. Now it's at 72%. Racism went down, has been going down since the 1950s. Yet the problems in the Black community have been on the rise, and they're directly attributable to these stats, which in any population happen and are causal, and they're easily known to be causal. I mean, think about it. If you didn't have your dad in your life and you only had kind of males around who weren't the best role models, what would you have been like? Is there a higher probability that you would have ended up in prison or had crime problems or had done more stupid things than you already did, even though you did have a good dad in the home? For hell's sake, I know I would have. I don't know where I'd be without my dad and the male role models that I had in my life. That's what happens to young men as they get older. So when you see these shocking statistics where Blacks are struggling so much, are we going to really deny that these two data sets are not connected? Why would we expect equal outcomes in groups with totally different family dynamics? I mean, shockingly different. Now, granted, white families as well. If you go and look at the statistics, there's a great book by Charles Murray called Coming Apart, where he explores white America, specifically white Americans in kind of the lower demographic. It's specifically in homes that have more single parent families. And what do you find? More poverty, more crime, more violence. The Blacks just have more of it. When your families are this broken, it's hard to have a stable society of any kind. And that's why you end up with mass incarceration. Now, please keep in mind, here's a little chart you should look at. Have you ever looked at who's actually in jail and for what? So let's look, for instance, at prisons, right? These are the big things. These aren't people who are just in or out of a jail cell in a week or whatever. These are people that are actually in prison, okay? Out of the 1.2 million people in our prisons, only 45,000 are there for drug possession. Okay? That's bonkers. So fine. All right. You guys want to get rid of all the drug? You're only literally getting rid of 45,000 people out of 1.2 million if we let all the drug possession offenders go. Really? You want to know who's part of this 1.2 million? 700,000 of them are violent offenders for assault, robbery, rape, manslaughter, or murder. You're going to let those guys out? How about property crimes? Theft, carjacking, burglaries, weapons charges. These are serious offenders that are in the state prisons. Not just people that were out smoking weed with their buddies on the weekend and got caught by the cops. All right? So, one other thing. People think that, cops must be racist. Well, they never look at, do you know there are Black police officers? If it was driven by racism, specifically a white on Black racism, then why is it that the studies show, as from this obviously right-wing propaganda arm, NPR, who obviously reports that studies show that white police officers are not more likely to shoot minority suspects? Okay? In other words, Black cops, white cops treat Black criminals the same. Why? Because Black criminals have a higher rate of violence. And why do they have a higher rate of violence? Because people who grow up without their fathers in their homes go down very different paths than people who don't, especially when that comes to young men. And that is why you have a group that is such a tiny portion of the population, 3 or 4% young Black men, that are accounting for close to half the violent crime in the entire country. Okay? And yes, cops should treat everyone equally, but when your life's on the line and you have someone who you know nothing about, who fits the profile of a group that is highly known to commit violent crime, you might be a little more on edge. Is that right? No. But it happens. And it's easy to be an armchair quarterback. So in the end, no. The evidence does not point to the fact that just because there are disparities between Blacks and whites in rates of incarceration and other things, if you do not account for the fact that of the extremely high violent crime rate and the effect that that has on police presence, on police interactions, on the fact that police are more often assaulted and killed by Black people or by Black criminals than by the population generally. You should not expect parity in the results. You should expect disparity. You should expect different results when you have populations that have such different demographics and primarily stemming from fatherless homes. But why are their homes fatherless? Well, that's a much more complex topic. And it's one that I definitely want to get into in another video.